The winter wind cut through the clearing like an unforgiving knife, whipping against Sarah's thin coat and lifting the last remnants of snow from the ground into frantic, swirling patterns. Her fingers red and stiff, fumbled with the hammer as she tried to force it into the warped nails she had salvaged from the collapsed barn. Each nail bent and twisted, almost refusing to cooperate, and she cursed under her breath. Though the sound was swallowed almost immediately by the wind, she paused to rub her hands together, willing warmth back into them, but it was futile. Every movement seemed to steal a bit of life from her. The boards she had gathered were broken, some splintered halfway down their length, others so warped they refused to lie flat. Yet she persisted, driven by a stubborn sense of survival that had hardened in her. After the loss of her husband, she crouched low, placing one cracked board on the uneven ground and lifting another, pressing it against the makeshift wall she was trying to build. The wood groaned under her hands, complaining about the weight and the cold, and when she hammered a nail into it, the board shivered as though in pain. The structure leaned dangerously to one side, and she had to brace it with her knee to keep it from toppling. "Hold together," she whispered to the board, and then to herself, "Just hold together, please." Her words seemed absurd in the emptiness of the clearing, but she clung to them, as if hope could be hammered into the wood like the nails themselves. Each day since Luke's death had been a battle against loneliness and decay. The barn had once been the heart of the ranch, the place where Luke's laughter mixed with the sound of horses, stamping and cattle lowing. Now it was nothing more than a ruin, a heap of wood and memories, just like so much else that had fallen apart since spring. Sarah had tried to keep the ranch going, had tried to honor Luke's life, but the world had steadily closed in. Workers had left when there was nothing left to pay them. The livestock had been sold or died, and slowly, the wide-open land seemed to shrink around her. The snow made the emptiness more pronounced, turning the fields into a pale sea of white, with only the skeletal remains of fences and broken boards to mark where life once thrived. The silence pressed against her ears, thick and unrelenting, and she welcomed the sound of the hammer even though it barely made a dent against the roar of the wind. A crunch of boots against the snow made her freeze. She felt it before she even heard it properly, a deliberate step that carried weight and purpose. Her heart stuttered, but she didn't turn. She already knew who it was, Jacob, Luke's brother, the man who had always moved through the world as though it resisted him at every step. She had imagined he might come eventually, though in her mind, she had often pictured him arriving in anger, in regret, in some mix of grief and resentment. But reality was heavier, sharper, and far more unsettling than imagination. Jacob stopped a few feet away, snow gathering on his shoulders and dark coat, and crossed his arms against the wind. His eyes were fixed on the lopsided shelter, studying every crooked line, every jagged edge, as though he could read the story of her grief in the cracks of the boards. Sarah continued hammering, each strike sending splinters flying, refusing to meet his gaze. She didn't want his judgment. She didn't want to feel the way he made her feel, small, incapable, somehow less than the person she had tried to be while Luke had been alive. "This what you've come to?" he said finally, his voice low but carrying over the wind. "Building a shack out of scrap wood?" Sarah didn't respond immediately. She kept hammering, though her hands shook. "It's temporary," she said at last, the word sharp, brittle, like the wood she was trying to hold together. "Temporary?" Jacob echoed, his tone incredulous. "It looks like it's about to fall apart any second. You could get hurt." "I know," she admitted, tightening the grip on the hammer. Her heart pounded, not from fear of the boards collapsing, but from the old, familiar ache of having him there. He had left after Luke died, leaving her to face the ranch and the memories alone, and now he stood watching her struggle, a reminder of everything she had lost. "You could have asked for help," he said quietly, a hint of something softer in his voice, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I did," she shot back, finally turning her face toward him, letting the snow sting her cheeks. "You said the ranch was Luke's world, not yours. And then you left. You didn't come back." Jacob's jaw tightened. He shifted his weight, the boots scraping the snow. I couldn't face it. I couldn't face you. Every time I thought about checking on you, I remembered him. And I couldn't what?" Sarah snapped, her voice cracking despite her effort to stay steady. "Couldn't see me? Couldn't see what I needed? Couldn't stay when things got hard?" She slammed the hammer into the last board of the wall, making it shudder violently, Jacob flinched, but he didn't step closer. I didn't know what to do, he admitted. I thought, if I stayed away, maybe the pain would be easier for both of us. Pain doesn't get easier when you run from it, she said, her voice dropping to a bitter whisper. It just waits, and it comes back over and over until it feels like it will crush you. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind tearing at the fragile structure between them, and Sarah realized how exhausted she was. Her arms ached, her hands bled from splinters and frost, and yet she had persisted, because no one was coming. Not really. Not until now. Jacob looked down at the leaning wall, then back at her. It's going to fall apart, he said, almost to himself. His voice lacked its usual sharpness, replaced by a quiet awe and unease. Sarah met his gaze, the wind cutting across their faces. So did everything else, she said softly, almost a confession, almost an apology for surviving. She didn't need him to say anything more. She only needed him to see. A gust tore through the clearing, lifting the tarp she had tied over the top of the shelter. It flapped violently, threatening to rip free. Sarah's stomach tightened. She felt the fragility of everything around her, the boards, the tarp, her hands, her life, shivering in the cold. Jacob's eyes flicked to the flapping tarp, then back to her. Let me help, he said finally, his voice steadier now. You don't have to do it alone. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since he had arrived. There was grief there, yes, but there was something else too. A willingness to stand in the cold, to face the storm, to face her. And though she hesitated, she let herself imagine what it would be like if he did stay, if someone else, even him, could help her hold the pieces together. Maybe they wouldn't crumble entirely. She lifted another cracked board, holding it in place. Jacob stepped forward without asking, pressing his shoulder against the lean and helping her drive the nail home. For the first time in months, the wind didn't feel quite so unbearable, because she wasn't completely alone. The storm came faster than Sarah had anticipated. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened into a heavy, leaden gray, and the snow fell in thick sheets, driven by gusts of wind that made the trees groan and bend as if they were alive. She crouched inside the half-built shelter, knees pressed to her chest, arms wrapped around herself. Each board shivered under the assault of the storm, threatening to splinter completely. Her teeth chattered, her fingers numb despite her gloves, and she could feel her heart thudding against her ribs. Each beat loud in the oppressive silence except for the wind's roar. She hugged herself tighter, wishing, even for a moment, that someone, anyone, was there to share the burden of the cold, the fear and the aching solitude. A shadow moved outside, caught in the corner of her eye. She stiffened. For a moment she thought it was a trick of the storm, a phantom conjured by the swirling snow and her frayed nerves. But then the door, a flimsy piece of board held upright by a few precarious nails, swung open with a violent snap. Snow poured in, stinging her face, and Jacob stepped inside, shoulders hunched against the wind, his coat coated in ice crystals. "You need to get out of this thing," he shouted over the howl of the storm. "It's not safe." "I don't have anywhere else to go," Sarah shouted back, her voice cracking, almost swallowed by the wind itself. She struggled to keep her balance as another gust slammed against the walls, making the boards shiver violently. Jacob moved closer, bracing himself against the leaning wall. "You think I don't know what it feels like to lose everything?" he shouted, his eyes fierce against the wind. "I've been here. I've seen what it does to a person, and you can't do this alone." Sarah's chest heaved. She had spent months surviving on her own, convincing herself that the work, the cold, the loneliness, and the despair were tolerable. But now, faced with him, the brother of the man she had loved and lost, she felt the raw, hollow ache of isolation even more sharply. "You left," she yelled, tears freezing on her cheeks. "You left after Luke died. You didn't check on me. You didn't care." Jacob flinched, and the storm seemed to pause around his expression. His eyes softened, though the edges of his face remained sharp, tense. "I couldn't," he admitted, his voice low now, almost swallowed by the wind. "I couldn't look at you without seeing him. Every time I thought about coming back, I remembered him, and I couldn't. I just couldn't." Sarah stared at him, incredulous. "So you ran?" She spat the word, her voice trembling with anger, grief, and exhaustion. "You left me to freeze, to starve, to fight for everything alone while you hid behind your grief." "I wasn't hiding," Jacob shouted, stepping closer. I was trying to survive it, trying to survive myself. Seeing you struggle, it tore me up inside. I thought distance would make it easier for both of us. I thought it would protect you from seeing how weak I am." Sarah sank back against the boards, breathing heavily. The wind whipped through the half-built shelter, and she felt the fragile walls quivering around her. "Weakness doesn't get you anywhere," she said quietly, her anger now tempered by exhaustion and shock. "It leaves you alone in the cold, while life moves on and takes everything else you've built." Jacob's jaw tightened. He took a step closer, bracing the fragile wall with his shoulder. "Then let me help," he said quietly, a rare softness in his voice. "Let me stop you from being alone." The roof groaned above them, one of the boards snapping, sending a small cascade of snow into the shelter. Sarah flinched, gripping the nearest post, her heart hammering. "I don't know if it can be saved," she whispered, almost to herself. Jacob looked at her, really looked at her, the storm whipping his hair into his face. "Neither can we. But we can survive it together. I can't fix everything, but I can help hold it up. Let me." She swallowed hard, her chest tight. The anger that had burned through her like wildfire now cooled into something quieter, something that hovered on the edge of hope. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. "After all this time?" "Because I couldn't stay away anymore," he said, stepping closer so that his shoulder pressed against hers, bracing the structure together.
"Watching you fight."
"Alone when you didn't deserve. It was worse than facing my own grief. I had to come back." Sarah's eyes stung, tears froze into her cheeks. She wanted to push him away, to insist that she didn't need anyone. But the weight of the storm, the cold, the despair, and the relentless ache of loneliness pressed down on her like a physical force, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to lean against him, to let someone else share the burden. Jacob adjusted his hold, pressing his shoulder against the sagging wall and taking some of the weight from her hands. "We'll make it through this," he said, his voice firm but calm. "It won't be perfect, but it'll keep you alive tonight. That's enough for now." The wind tore another board loose, and the two of them leaned together to hold the shelter upright. Snow fell in thick sheets around them, blinding and biting, but inside, there was a fragile warmth, the warmth of shared struggle, of someone else standing beside her when the world seemed intent on tearing her apart. Sarah looked at the boards, the broken nails, the shivering walls, and then at him. "This fragile little thing is all I had," she whispered. Jacob nodded. "Then let me help you protect it. Let me help you hold on." For a long moment, they simply braced the walls together, the storm roaring around them, and Sarah realized that it wasn't the shelter that mattered. It was the presence beside her, the warmth of a hand, the strength of someone willing to stay when everything else threatened to fall apart. Finally, Jacob spoke again. "There's a bunkhouse not far from here. The old one. We can get you inside. Stoveworks, dry firewood, warmth, safety. You don't have to freeze out here." Sarah blinked, stunned. "You fixed it?" "I fixed it hoping you might show up," he admitted. "I didn't know if you'd survive out here alone, and I couldn't wait anymore." The wind slammed against the fragile walls one final time, and Sarah realized with a shudder that the shelter could not withstand another gust. She let go of the post, stepping back. "Then, I'll go," she said, her voice trembling. Jacob held out his hand. "Come with me. We'll make it there together." She took his hand, gripping it tightly, feeling the warmth of his fingers against hers. Together they stepped out into the storm, the fragile shelter left behind, its broken boards flailing against the wind like a warning. But ahead of them, through the swirling snow, the old bunkhouse stood, windows glowing faintly with light and warmth. It was imperfect, but it was something solid, something real. Jacob kept one arm around her as they trudged toward it, each step a fight against the wind and the snow, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt the impossible, a flicker of hope, a sense that perhaps life had not yet abandoned her completely. And as the glow of the bunkhouse grew nearer, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could survive the storm if she didn't have to do it alone. The wind howled and the snow whipped around them, but inside the warmth of human presence, of shared struggle, began to thaw the cold that had gripped her for so long. And in that quiet, fragile hope, she realized that even broken things, shelters, hearts, lives, could sometimes be held together if someone was willing to stand beside them and brace them against the storm.